Have you ever lost something precious? A toy? A pet? Or maybe your favorite book? Now imagine losing the most important people in your life, in a place you thought was safe. For the Holloway family, their peaceful farm became a nightmare when 10-year-old twins Ren and Ivy vanished during a simple game of hide and seek. No footprints leading away, no signs of strangers, just two little girls who stepped into the golden wheat field one sunny afternoon and disappeared. But on this farm, nothing stays buried forever. And after 1 month of desperate searching, their mother Marlene is about to discover that sometimes the darkest secrets hide in plain sight, under a simple hay bale that nobody thought to check. What will she find there? And more importantly, will she wish she never looked? Let me tell you what happened on that summer day when two little girls went missing. The laughter of twin girls echoed across the sun-drenched farm as Ren and Ivy Holloway darted between rows of corn. Their identical auburn pigtails bounced in, rhythm with their footsteps, both wearing matching denim overalls that were already stained with grass and dirt. "You count to 50, Ren shouted to her sister, pushing her toward the old oak tree that had served as their counting spot since they were 5. "And no peeking this time." Ivy rolled her eyes, but smiled. At 10 years old, she was the more serious of the twins, though only by 3 minutes. "Fine, but no hiding in Dad's tractor again. Mom got really mad last time." From the kitchen window, Marlene Holloway smiled as she watched her daughters through a veil of steam rising from fresh-baked apple pie. The familiar scene warmed her heart. Another carefree summer day on the farm that had been in her husband's family for 3 generations. She wiped flour-covered hands on her apron and checked the clock. 4:15 p.m. Plenty of time before dinner. In the distance, Silas Holloway's broad-shouldered silhouette moved in and out of the barn doorway as he repaired farm equipment. The rhythmic clanging of his tools provided a steady backdrop to the girls' play. Ivy pressed her forehead against the rough bark of the oak, closed her eyes tight, and began counting. 1, 2, 3. Ren took off, scanning the landscape for the perfect hiding spot. The wheat field's golden waves beckoned. Beyond that, hay bales dotted the eastern pasture like giant building blocks. The possibilities were endless. 48, 49, 50. "Ready or not, here I come." Ivy's voice carried across the property as she turned from the tree, her eyes narrowed with determination. Inside the farmhouse, Marlene slid the second pie into the oven. The dinner table was already set for 4, with the girls' favorite wildflowers in a mason jar centerpiece. She glanced at the window again, noticing how the afternoon light had shifted. The shadows were growing longer. Silas entered through the back door, his hands greasy from machinery. "Something smells amazing in here," he said, planting a kiss on his wife's cheek. "Wash up before you touch anything else," Marlene laughed, swatting him playfully with a dish towel. "I'm making the girls' favorite tonight. Where are they, anyway?" "Still playing, I suppose. I saw them running around earlier." Marlene nodded, but a small crease appeared between her eyebrows as she checked the clock again. 5:38 p.m. "Girls," she called out the kitchen window, "dinner in 20 minutes. Come wash up." Only silence answered her call. Ivy had searched most of the obvious places, behind the tractor shed, in the chicken coop, under the porch. No sign of Ren. It wasn't unusual for her sister to find increasingly clever hiding spots, but something felt different this time. The farm suddenly seemed too big, the hiding places too numerous. "Ren!" she called, competitive spirit giving way to irritation. "I give up. You win." No response came from the vast property. Back in the kitchen, Marlene's unease grew as she called. Out again, this time stepping onto the back porch. "Wren! Ivy! Dinner's ready!" Silas emerged from the bathroom, drying his hands. "They're not coming?" "I don't see them." Marlene's voice tightened. "Can you check the barn again?" The sun was beginning its descent, casting an orange glow across the fields as Silas jogged to the barn. Marlene circled the house, checking all the girls' usual spots. By 6:30 p.m., with dinner growing cold on the table, both parents were striding across the property, their calls growing more urgent with each passing minute. "Wren! Ivy!" Silas's deep voice boomed across the wheat field. Marlene's heart hammered in her chest as she ran towards the hay bales. "Girls, this isn't funny anymore. Come out right now." As twilight enveloped the farm, a terrible realization dawned on Marlene. Her daughters were truly missing. She sprinted back to the house, hands shaking as she dialed the phone. "Sheriff's office? Please, you have to help us," she gasped, tears streaming down her face. "My twin daughters are missing." Outside, Silas stood in the center of the vast property, turning in a slow circle as darkness fell. The farm that had always been their sanctuary now loomed threatening and vast, hiding his little girls somewhere in its expanse. Marlene dropped the phone and ran back outside, her voice breaking as she screamed their names into the dimming light. The wind carried her cries across the empty fields, past the swaying wheat, beyond the hay bales that stood like silent sentinels as night claimed the Holloway farm, and with it all traces of Wren and Ivy. Headlights cut through the darkness as 3 police cruisers rolled up the dirt driveway of the Holloway farm. Sheriff Emmett Doherty stepped out first, his weathered face grim beneath the brim of his hat. He'd known the Holloways since before the twins were born. "Silas," he nodded, gripping the farmer's shoulder. "We'll find them." Neighbors arrived in pickup trucks and on foot, carrying flashlights and thermoses of coffee. Within an hour, 20 people gathered in the front yard as Emmett organized search parties. "They're just little girls playing hide-and-seek," Marlene whispered, her voice hoarse from calling their names. They couldn't have gone far. But the farm stretched over 80 acres, bordered by woods to the north, and the Wilson property to the east. Darkness made the familiar landscape alien and threatening. "Marlene, honey, come inside," urged Betty Wilson, who had rushed over as soon as she heard. "You need to stay by the phone in case they call." "They're 10 years old," Marlene snapped, pulling away. "Who would they call? They're out there, scared and alone." "I'm not going inside." Silas approached with another flashlight. "She's right, Betty. We can't just sit and wait." As the search parties dispersed across the property, Marlene found herself walking alongside Sheriff Dougherty toward the wheat field. "Tell me about their day," he prompted gently. "Anything unusual happen?" Marlene shook her head, flashlight beam trembling as she swept it across the golden stalks. It was just a normal day. They were playing hide-and-seek after lunch. Wren's always pushing boundaries, finding the most impossible hiding spots. Last month she squeezed into an old feed barrel and gave us all a heart attack. And Ivy? Ivy's the cautious one. Always has a book nearby, plans everything. She wouldn't wander off. Marlene's voice cracked. "That's why this doesn't make sense. Even if Wren suggested something dangerous, Ivy would talk her out of it." The wheat parted beneath their hands as they moved deeper into the field, calling for the girls. Each unanswered call tightened the knot in Marlene's stomach. Meanwhile, Silas led another group toward the old well at the property's edge. The stone structure had been sealed years ago, but fear drove him to check anyway. As his flashlight illuminated the concrete cap, he suddenly collapsed to his knees. "Silas!" One of the neighbors rushed to his side. "I can't lose them," he sobbed, his large frame shaking. "They're everything." The facade of strength he'd maintained crumbled as primal fear overtook him, the terror of a father imagining his children in danger. The night stretched endlessly. Moths fluttered around flashlight beams. Dogs barked in the distance as the local K9 unit arrived to assist. Marlene refused water, food, rest, moving mechanically across the property like a ghost. Around midnight, Betty tried again to coax her inside. "Just for a moment, Marlene. You need to keep up your strength." "Did you know," Marlene said, her eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the barn, "that Wren sleepwalks? We found her in the kitchen last month, trying to make pancakes in her sleep. And Ivy can't fall asleep without her stuffed rabbit. They've never spent a night away from home." Betty wrapped an arm around her shoulders as Marlene finally broke, tears streaming down her face. "My babies are out there somewhere." As false dawn lightened the eastern sky, hope flickered briefly in exhausted hearts. Daylight would make the search easier. Silas joined Marlene on the front porch, his eyes red-rimmed, stubble darkening his jaw. "Sheriff Dougherty called in state police," he murmured. "They'll be here with more dogs by sunrise." Marlene nodded, beyond speech after hours of screaming their daughters' names. As the first true rays of sunlight spilled across the farm, illuminating dew-drenched fields and tired searchers, Deputy Collins approached from the eastern property, line. He held something small and pink in his gloved hand. "Found this near the fence bordering the old Henderson place," he reported, holding it out. Marlene's knees buckled as she recognized Ivy's favorite hair ribbon, the one she'd been wearing. "Yesterday." Silas caught her before she hit the ground. The ribbon fluttered in the morning breeze, the first and only trace of the twins. A small splash of color against the vast emptiness of the farm that had swallowed Wren and Ivy Holloway without a trace. By mid-morning, the Holloway farm had transformed into a command center. State police erected a tent on the front lawn. Volunteers signed in at a folding table, receiving assigned search areas and walkie-talkies. 3 television news vans parked along the driveway, reporters setting up equipment with practiced efficiency. Marlene sat at the kitchen table, Ivy's pink ribbon clutched in her trembling fingers. The small piece of fabric had become both talisman and torture, proof her daughters had existed and were now gone. Sheriff Dougherty spread a large map of the county across the table. "We've covered most of your property," he explained, voice gentle but professional. "Today, we're expanding the search radius to 5 miles in all directions." Silas nodded mechanically, eyes bloodshot from a sleepless night. "What about the ribbon? What does it tell us?" "It confirms they were heading east," Dougherty replied. "We've got tracking dogs working from that location now." A knock at the screen door interrupted them. Miriam Blackwood, a wiry woman in her 70s from the neighboring farm, entered carrying 2 large casserole dishes. "Brought some food," she announced, placing them on the counter. "Can't help with the searching anymore. Bad knees, but I can make sure you eat." "Thank you, Miriam," Silas mumbled. Miriam moved to Marlene's side, her weathered hand resting on the younger woman's shoulder. "They'll find your girls," she said, eyes fixed intently on Marlene's face. "This land doesn't keep secrets forever." Something in the old woman's tone made Marlene look up, but Miriam had already turned away, busying herself with organizing the growing collection of food from neighbors. Outside, the search parties regrouped. K9 units with German shepherds headed toward the eastern boundary where Ivy's ribbon had been found. Volunteers on ATVs prepared to check the more distant fields and creek beds. Local farmers brought horses to navigate the rougher terrain. Pastor Tuan Seaturn Williams from the Methodist Church led a brief prayer circle before the teams departed. Lord, watch over Wren and Ivy Holloway. Guide those searching to find them and bring them safely home. As the crowd dispersed, a sleek silver sedan pulled up. A woman in pressed khakis and a blouse stepped out, camera hanging around her neck. Her confident stride carried her straight to the police tape, where she flashed a press badge. Jamie Winters, Oak Ridge Tribune. She introduced herself to Deputy Collins. I'd like to speak with the family. Not now, he replied firmly. They're cooperating with the investigation. The first 48 hours are critical in missing persons cases, she persisted. The more coverage we can generate, the better chances of finding those girls. Inside, Silas joined the search teams while Marlene reluctantly agreed to stay by the phone. Miriam remained, washing dishes with quiet efficiency. I remember when my Robert went missing back in '83, the old woman said suddenly. Boy was always wandering off. Found him asleep in our cornfield half a day later. Marlene looked up sharply. I didn't know you had children. A shadow crossed Miriam's face. Long time ago. She changed the subject. Those girls of yours, they always did stick together. Never saw one without the other. Wren's the adventurous one, Marlene said automatically, the way she'd been explaining to everyone. Ivy follows. She worries, but never lets her sister go alone. Miriam nodded knowingly. Twins have special bonds. My grandmother was a twin. Said they could feel each other's pain across miles. By afternoon, volunteers had distributed 500 missing posters throughout the county. The twins' freckled faces looked out from store windows, community boards, and telephone poles. Missing, Wren and Ivy Holloway, age 10, last seen Holloway Farm, followed by physical descriptions and contact numbers. Jamie Winters had managed to interview several neighbors, carefully noting Silas Holloway's recent considerations of selling land to developers, information that added a hint of controversy to her article already taking shape. As the sun began its westward arc, Sheriff Dougherty returned to the house, the lines on his face deeper than when he'd left. The dogs lost the scent at Copper Creek, he reported. We're dragging the deeper pools, but honestly, I don't think they were there. It's more likely they crossed the water deliberately. Or someone took them across, Deputy Collins added, then caught himself as Marlene's face went ashen. Evening brought dwindling hope and aching muscles. Search teams returned to the farm for hot meals and fresh assignments. Marlene moved like a sleepwalker through the house, unable to rest yet barely functioning. As darkness fell again, Silas stood on the porch, watching flashlight beams move across his fields like fireflies. The farm that had been in his family for generations now felt like enemy territory, hiding his daughters somewhere in its vastness. Upstairs, Marlene entered the twins' bedroom for the first time since their disappearance. 2 matching beds with colorful quilts. Bookshelves filled with adventure stories and science books. A telescope pointed toward the window. Ivy's birthday present. She collapsed onto Wren's bed, burying her face in the pillow that still smelled of her daughter's strawberry shampoo. When she finally lifted her head, something on the floor caught her eye. The twins' favorite dolls, handmade cloth figures Marlene had sewn when they were 5, sat propped against the dresser. Marlene froze. She distinctly remembered the dolls being on the girls' beds yesterday morning. Now they sat side by side, hands touching, facing the door, as if watching and waiting. She backed out of the room, a chill running down her spine. Someone had been in the twins' room. someone who wasn't family. Marlene backed away from the twins' bedroom, heart pounding. She rushed downstairs and found Sheriff Dougherty in the kitchen. "Someone's been in their room," she gasped. "The dolls! They've been moved." Dougherty immediately dispatched deputies to check the house. They found no signs of forced entry, no footprints, nothing else disturbed. "Could Silas have moved them?" Dougherty asked gently. "No," Marlene insisted. "He wouldn't go in there. It's too painful." 7 days had passed since the twins vanished. The initial surge of volunteers had dwindled to a dedicated few. Police presence remained strong, but the absence of new leads cast a pall over the investigation. On the morning of the 8th day, a black sedan with government plates rolled up the driveway. A tall woman with close-cropped silver hair stepped out, badge already in hand. Detective Lorna Hayes, State Bureau of Investigation. She introduced herself to Dougherty. "I've been assigned to assist with the Holloway case." Hayes moved with precise efficiency, setting up in the dining room with case files and maps. Her city clothes and clipped accent stood out among the rural officers and volunteers. "I need to re-interview everyone," she announced. Sometimes fresh questions reveal overlooked details. She started with the Holloways, sitting them down separately. With Marlene, her approach was sympathetic but probing. "Tell me about your marriage," Hayes asked. Marlene blinked in surprise. "What does that have to do with finding my daughters?" "Standard procedure," Hayes replied evenly. "I need to understand the family dynamics." Reluctantly, Marlene described her 12-year marriage to Silas, their struggle with infertility before the twins, the financial pressures of maintaining the farm. With Silas, Hayes was more direct. "I understand you've been considering selling part of the farm to developers." Silas stiffened. "Who told you that?" "Is it true?" He rubbed his face wearily. "We've been approached, yes. The East 40 acres. It would ease our financial burden considerably." "And how do your neighbors feel about potential development?" "Some don't like it, particularly Old Man Jenkins. Says it would ruin the character of the area." Hayes made notes. "Any threats? Confrontations?" "Nothing serious, just grumbling at the co-op." That afternoon, Hayes interviewed neighbors. Betty, Wilson mentioned the twins' habit of exploring. George Jenkins complained about Silas's potential land sale. Miriam Blackwood watched the proceedings from her rocking chair on the Holloway's porch, offering Hayes a cup of tea that was politely declined. When the detective finally approached Miriam, the old woman smiled. "Wouldn't waste your time on an old lady like me. I was home canning preserves that day." "You seem to spend a lot of time here now," Hayes observed. "Neighbors help neighbors," Miriam replied, her eyes never leaving Marlene through the window, especially in tragedy. Later, Marlene went to water the flower beds, seeking mundane tasks to occupy her hands, if not her mind. As she moved the watering can over the wilting petunias, something glinted in the soil. Bending down, she uncovered Wren's favorite hair clip, a butterfly with blue rhinestones. "Silas!" she screamed, clutching the clip. "I found something!" The clip was bagged as evidence, but Hayes looked skeptical. "This area has been searched multiple times. How did we miss it?" "It wasn't here before," Marlene insisted. "I've watered these flowers every day." That evening, as Marlene collapsed exhausted onto the porch swing, Hayes sat beside her with 2 cups of coffee. "Mrs. Holloway, I need to ask, is there anyone who might want to hurt your family? Anyone with a grudge against you or your husband?" Marlene stared at her. "You think someone took them deliberately? Not just that they wandered off?" Hayes chose her words carefully. "The evidence suggests multiple possibilities. I'm exploring all angles. As twilight settled over the farm, Marlene couldn't shake Hayes's implication. She thought of Jenkins's anger over the land sale, the journalist's probing questions, Miriam's strange intensity. Could someone in their tight-knit community be responsible? The next morning, Marlene found Ivy's notebook under the porch swing. The purple journal contained the girls' neat handwriting. The last entry dated the day before they disappeared. Wren says there's a secret place on the farm where no one can find us. She won't tell me where, says it's a surprise. Marlene's hands trembled as she showed it to Hayes. This wasn't here yesterday. I swept the entire porch. Hayes examined the notebook, frowning. No dust or weather damage. It's as if someone's just placed it here. Someone's playing games with us, Silas growled, pacing the kitchen. That night, Marlene sat alone in the darkened living room, the physical and emotional exhaustion of the past week taking its toll. The house creaked and settled around her, familiar sounds now sinister in their ordinariness. A faint giggle drifted from upstairs, a sound so achingly familiar that Marlene froze, afraid to breathe lest it disappear. "Wren? Ivy?" she whispered, rising from her chair. The sound came again, children's laughter, muffled but distinct. Marlene raced upstairs, hope and terror warring in her chest. The twins' bedroom door stood ajar, but when she pushed it open, only moonlight greeted her. The laughter echoed again, this time seemingly from outside. Marlene pressed her face to the window, eyes straining in the darkness. There, a flicker of movement near the barn. Without stopping for a flashlight, she bolted downstairs and out the back door. The night air was cool against her skin as she ran across the yard, following the sound of giggles that always seemed just ahead. The barn door creaked in the wind, revealing darkness beyond. "Girls!" Marlene called, stepping inside. "Are you in here?" Her voice echoed in the empty space. The laughter had stopped. Nothing moved in the shadows except dust motes illuminated by moonlight streaming through the hayloft window. Marlene stood alone in the silent barn, the hope that had propelled her there evaporating like morning dew. Dawn crept over the horizon. As Marlene stumbled back to the house, exhaustion and disappointment weighing her steps. She hadn't told anyone about the laughter she'd heard, couldn't bear to see the pitying looks if they thought she was hallucinating her missing children. 2 weeks had passed. The police presence had thinned, the media vans disappeared. Only Detective Hayes remained constant, her methodical investigation continuing while local officers were called to other duties. Marlene sat at the kitchen table, staring at her untouched coffee when Hayes burst through the door, energy radiating from her usually composed demeanor. "We have a lead," she announced, placing her phone on the table. "A trucker named Ray Dawson just called the hotline. Says he picked up 2 young girls, matching Wren and Ivy's description on Route 16 last Wednesday." Silas, who'd been mechanically sorting through mail, looked up sharply. "Where? Where did he take them?" 15 miles north, near the old Sundown Carnival grounds. Says they asked specifically to be dropped there. "The abandoned amusement park?" Marlene frowned. "Why would they go there?" "That's what we're going to find out," Hayes replied, already dialing Sheriff Dougherty. "Dawson's coming in to give a formal statement this afternoon." Within hours, search teams converged on the derelict carnival grounds. Once a popular summer attraction, Sundown Carnival had closed 5 years ago after safety violations and dwindling attendance. Now it stood as a rusting monument to forgotten fun. Twisted metal rides silhouetted against the sky like strange sculptures. Hayes supervised the search from a command tent, reviewing satellite images with Dougherty. "If they've been hiding here, They've had access to shelter, at least. Marlene couldn't reconcile the image of her sensible daughters choosing such a place. They were afraid of the Ferris wheel even when it was operating. Ivy had nightmares after we visited. Kids sometimes surprise us, Hayes said gently, especially when they're together. Silas paced the perimeter, shouting the girls' names until his voice grew hoarse. The old carnival grounds were eerily silent except for the occasional creak of metal contracting in the afternoon heat. As teams methodically searched abandoned ticket booths and concession stands, Marlene found herself drawn to the carousel. Faded horses with chipped paint stood frozen mid-gallop, eternally circling nowhere. Wren had loved carousels, always chose the black horse with the red saddle. Back at the farm, Miriam Blackwood let herself in through the unlocked back door. With the Holloways at the search site, she moved through the empty house with surprising familiarity. In the twins' room, she straightened already. Neat bed covers, fingers lingering on the dolls now returned to their places. "Not yet," she whispered, to the empty room. Still waiting, when the Holloways returned home that evening, Miriam was in the kitchen, a pot of stew simmering on the stove. "Any news?" she asked, serving them bowls they didn't ask for. The trucker identified the girls from their photos, Silas replied, wearily. "But we found nothing at the carnival." "They can't have simply vanished," Marlene said, pushing away her untouched food. Miriam's eyes fixed on her with unsettling intensity. "You look exhausted, dear. You need rest. Why don't I make up a tea that will help you sleep?" Later, curled on the twins' empty beds, Marlene descended into fitful dreams of her daughters calling for her from some place she couldn't reach. The following day brought a breakthrough and new questions. As search teams continued combing the EFE carnival grounds, Deputy Collins discovered small footprints in a patch of mud behind the defunct funhouse. 2 sets, he reported, measuring carefully. Right size for 10-year-olds, leading away from the carnival toward the forest. Tracking dogs followed the scent to the tree line but lost it shortly after. Forensic technicians made casts of the prints. "It's them," Hayes confirmed, comparing measurements to the twins' shoe sizes. "They were here, probably 3 or 4 days ago after that rainstorm." Hope surged through the searchers. For the first time in weeks, they had confirmation the girls were alive. Or had been recently. Yet questions multiplied. Why had they come to the carnival? Where were they going? How had they survived for 2 weeks without being seen? That night, Marlene refused to leave the search site, insisting on staying in Hayes's SUV while teams continued with flashlights and thermal imaging equipment. Silas reluctantly returned home to shower and gather supplies. He found Miriam still there, knitting in the living room rocker. "You should go home," he said, more sharply than intended. "It's late." The old woman's needles never stopped their rhythmic clicking. "Someone should keep the home fires burning," she replied, "in case they find their way back." "We found footprints," Silas said, his voice softening. "At the carnival." Miriam's hands stilled momentarily before resuming their work. "Did you now?" "That's interesting." When Silas went upstairs, Miriam placed her knitting in her bag, revealing old newspaper clippings underneath. Yellowed headlines mentioned children who had gone missing decades earlier. She quickly covered them when Silas returned. At the carnival grounds, Marlene sat with Detective Hayes as midnight approached. "Why aren't you at home getting rest?" Hayes asked, passing her a thermos of coffee. "I can't be in that house," Marlene admitted. "I keep hearing them, seeing things move, finding their belongings in places I've already searched." Hayes studied her carefully. "You think someone's deliberately placing those items?" "I don't know what to think anymore." Marlene stared out at the shadowy carnival rides. But Miriam is always there, watching me. The neighbor, she does seem invested. She told me today that she understands what I'm going through because she knows loss. Marlene turned to Hayes, but when I asked, she changed the subject. Hayes made a note. I'll look into her background. When Marlene finally dozed off in the passenger seat, she dreamed of Wren and Ivy playing amid towering hay bales. In the dream, one particular bale glowed with an inner light, and the girls kept pointing to it, their mouths moving with words she couldn't hear. She awoke with a gasp as dawn broke over the carnival grounds. Outside, a commotion had erupted. Near the forest edge, they found something. Hayes was already rushing toward the gathering crowd. Marlene followed, heart pounding, to find officers huddled around a strange discovery. The footprints they'd been following had simply stopped, as if the twins had vanished into thin air mid-step. "What does it mean?" Marlene whispered, staring at the abruptly terminated trail of footprints. The forest floor beyond showed no disturbance. No broken twigs, no displaced leaves, nothing to indicate where Wren and Ivy had gone. Detective Hayes crouched beside the last prints, her expression troubled. Could be many things. They might have walked on stones or roots to avoid leaving tracks. Someone could have carried them. Or something took them, murmured a volunteer, quickly silenced by Doherty's sharp look. 3 weeks since the twins' disappearance, hope and sanity frayed like old rope. The discovery of the footprints had momentarily buoyed spirits, but this inexplicable dead end crushed that fragile optimism. Marlene watched silently as technicians photographed and measured the final impressions. Small, familiar footprints. Wren slightly pigeon-toed, Ivy with her perfect stride. Then, nothing. When they returned to the farm that evening, they found Silas on the porch, an empty whiskey bottle beside him. His eyes were bloodshot, his normally neat appearance disheveled. "I checked the well again," he slurred as Hayes helped him inside. "Checked every inch." "That well's been sealed for years," Marlene reminded him gently. "Should have put up better fences," Silas continued, as if he hadn't heard. "Should have watched them closer." Hayes guided him to the sofa, while Marlene made coffee. In the kitchen, she found Miriam arranging flowers in a vase. "Black-eyed Susans," the old woman explained. "Used to be your girls' favorite, weren't they? Always picking them from my garden." "How did you know that?" Marlene asked sharply. "They never told you that." Miriam's smile faltered. "Must have mentioned it to me. Memory plays tricks at my age." Later. That night, Sheriff Doherty asked to speak with Hayes privately on the porch. Marlene watched through the window as the two officers conversed in low, urgent tones. When Hayes returned inside, her expression was grave. Sheriff Doherty shared. "Something concerning," she began, sitting across from Marlene. 40 years ago, 3 children went missing in this county. 2 of them were twin girls. "What happened to them?" Marlene's voice barely audible. "They were never found." Hayes hesitated. "The disappearances occurred within a 5-mile radius of this farm." The implications hung in the air like smoke, a pattern spanning decades, a nightmare repeating itself. That night, unable to sleep, Marlene wandered the house. Passing Miriam's coat hanging in the hallway, she noticed something protruding from the pocket, the corner of what looked like old newspaper. Her fingers trembled as she slid it out. Yellowed clippings, carefully preserved in plastic sleeves. Headlines from 1985. "Local children still missing after 2 weeks." And "Search for missing twins continues." Photographs showed 2 small girls with ribbon-tied braids, alongside a boy about 12. Marlene's heart hammered as she flipped through the articles, then froze when she saw Miriam's name. Miriam Blackwood, cousin of the children's mother, assists in search efforts. The front door creaked. Miriam stood silhouetted against the night, her thin frame suddenly menacing. "Found my little collection, have you?" she asked, stepping inside. Her voice held none of its usual quaver. Marlene backed away. "You were involved in those disappearances?" "Involved?" Miriam's laugh was brittle. "I was devastated. My sister's children, taken, just like yours. Why didn't you tell us? Why? Keep these hidden?" Miriam moved to the kitchen, seemingly unconcerned. "Didn't want to frighten you with old tragedies. But I knew when your girls vanished. It's happening again." "Get out," Marlene whispered, then louder. "Get out of my house!" Miriam gathered her knitting bag with deliberate slowness. "The land has its ways, Marlene. It's hunger. You'll understand soon enough." After Miriam left, Marlene called Hayes, who promised to investigate the old woman immediately. The detective's voice was the only solid thing in Marlene's crumbling world. Unable to bear the silence, Marlene climbed the stairs to the twins' room. Moonlight spilled across empty beds, illuminating the dolls still propped against the pillows. As she turned to leave, movement at the foot of her bed made her freeze. A small figure stood in the shadows, child-sized, motionless. Marlene's breath caught. "Wren? Ivy?" she whispered, reaching out with trembling fingers. The figure didn't respond. As Marlene took a cautious step forward, it seemed to dissolve into the darkness. She stumbled forward, hands grasping empty air where the child shape had been. Gasping, Marlene fell to her knees. Grief, exhaustion, and fear collided, stealing her breath. She pressed her palms against the cool wooden floor to steady herself, and felt something underneath, a folded piece of paper. With shaking hands, she unfolded it to find a crude map drawn in crayon. Familiar landmarks appeared in childish scrawl: the house, the barn, the wheat field. Near the edge, a structure she'd almost forgotten was circled in red: the old storage shed. And beside it, written in Wren's unmistakable handwriting, "She watches us sleep." Marlene stared at the words until they blurred. "She watches us sleep." A chill rippled through her body despite the summer warmth. This was Wren's handwriting. There was no mistaking the backward S and the way she connected, her ease. She fumbled for her phone with trembling fingers and called Hayes. "I found something. A map, drawn by Wren. It shows the old storage shed." "I'm on my way," Hayes replied, voice sharp with alertness despite the late hour. "Don't go there alone." But Marlene couldn't wait. The storage shed stood at the far edge of the property, unused for years since they'd built the new equipment barn. If her daughters had left this clue, she had to follow it. Now. Grabbing a flashlight, she hurried downstairs and past Silas, who had finally passed out on the sofa. The night air felt heavy as she crossed the yard, her shadow stretching long and distorted in the moonlight. The shed was a dilapidated structure with weathered gray boards and a sagging roof. Marlene approached cautiously, flashlight beam dancing across the padlocked door. Strange. The lock looked new, incongruous against the aged wood. The windows were too grimy to see through. Marlene circled the shed, heart pounding in her ears. At the back, she discovered boards that had been removed and replaced, creating a small opening near the foundation, just large enough for a child to crawl through. Kneeling, she shone her light inside. The beam illuminated dust motes floating, in stale air and something else, drawings on the inner walls, crude childish images made with colored markers. She squinted, trying to make sense of them in the limited light. "Marlene!" Hayes's voice startled her. The detective approached with Doherty and 2 deputies. "What did you find?" "Look." Marlene pointed her flashlight at the opening. "Someone's been inside. There are drawings." Hayes examined the lock. "This is new. Who has the key?" "I don't know. We haven't used this shed in years." With the deputy's assistance, Hayes broke the padlock and carefully pushed open the creaking door. The smell of dust and something else, sweeter, like the candy the twins loved, wafted out. Inside, their flashlight beams revealed a startling sight. The walls were covered with children's drawings, stick figures playing in fields, a house with smoke curling from the chimney, and repeatedly, a tall feminine figure with long, dark hair watching over sleeping children. "My God," Hayes whispered, training her light on a corner where small wrappers and an empty juice box lay discarded. "Someone's been keeping them here." "Or they were hiding here," Doherty suggested. "Maybe they ran away?" Marlene shook her head, tracing her fingers over a drawing clearly signed Ivy in neat letters. "They would never run away, not without telling me." "We need forensics here immediately," Hayes directed, already on her radio. "And I want a background check on Miriam Blackwood. Full history." By morning, the shed had been transformed into a crime scene. Technicians photographed every drawing, collected every wrapper and fiber. The images on the wall told a disturbing story. The dark-haired woman appeared in almost every picture, sometimes smiling, sometimes with no expression at all. Silas arrived, nursing a hangover and shock. "I had no idea this was here," he insisted, staring at the drawings. "We never come to this part of the property anymore." Doherty pulled Hayes aside as Marlene and Silas huddled together. "I've got information on Miriam Blackwood," he said quietly. "Her nieces and nephew, the ones who disappeared in '85, they were never found. But there was evidence they'd been kept somewhere for weeks. Candy wrappers, drawings, similar to this." "Was she ever a suspect?" Hayes asked. "No. She was considered family, helping with the search. But here's the thing. This farm belonged to her family back then. The Holloways bought it 5 years after the disappearances, when Miriam's brother couldn't bear to stay anymore." The revelation hit Hayes like a physical blow. She's been on her ancestral property this whole time, watching, waiting. She turned to Doherty. "Find her. Now!" But Miriam was gone. Her small cottage stood empty, the front door swinging in the morning breeze. Inside, deputies found a shrine-like room with photographs of children spanning decades, some in frames, others pinned to walls. Many faces Doherty recognized from old missing persons cases. Back at the farm, Marlene sat at the kitchen table as Hayes shared what they'd learned. Miriam had twin daughters who died in a house fire in 1973. She was badly burned trying to save them. "So she's been taking children? For 50 years?" Marlene's voice cracked. "We don't know yet, but the pattern is clear. She's fixated on twins, particularly girls. But why return their belongings? Why leave clues?" Silas asked. Hayes shook her head. "Sometimes perpetrators play games. Or maybe part of her wants to be caught." The search for Miriam expanded across the county while forensic evidence from the shed was processed. Marlene couldn't bear to leave the farm, not when every new discovery suggested her daughters had been there recently. That night, exhausted beyond words, she finally allowed herself to sleep. In her dreams, Wren and Ivy stood in a golden field of swaying wheat. They were trying to tell her something, pointing urgently behind them. When she looked where they pointed, she saw hay bales stacked in a curious pattern. One bale glowed with an otherworldly light. Marlene jolted awake, the dream so vivid she could still smell fresh-cut hay. A strange certainty filled her. This wasn't just a dream born of desperation. It was a message. She grabbed her flashlight and jacket, slipping outside without waking Silas. The nearly full moon illuminated the farm in silvery light as she made her way to the eastern field, where they stored hay bales after harvest. Each step felt guided, as if she were merely following a path already laid out for her. The hay bales loomed like monoliths in the darkness, arranged in long rows. Marlene walked between them, running her hand along the scratchy surfaces, unsure what she was looking for, but certain she would know when she found it. A faint sound stopped her. Whispers carried on the night breeze. She held her breath, listening. There it was again, like children talking in hushed tones. "Wren? Ivy?" she called softly, afraid to frighten them away. The whispers ceased immediately. Marlene continued forward, flashlight beam sweeping across the hay bales. In her dream, one had glowed. In reality, they all looked identical. But then, a footprint in the soft earth beside one bale. Small, the size of a child's foot. Recent enough that evening dew hadn't filled it in. Marlene dropped to her knees, examining the ground around the bale. More footprints, some coming, some going. And there, barely visible against the hay, thin scratch marks at the base of the bale, as if something had been moved repeatedly. She placed her palms against the bale and pushed. It didn't budge. She tried again with her shoulder, straining, with all her might. Slowly, inch by inch, the massive bale moved, revealing disturbed earth beneath. Marlene fell back, breathing hard from the exertion. Her flashlight beam traveled over the exposed ground, revealing something that made her blood run cold. A metal ring embedded in the dirt. A handle, a trap door, hidden beneath the hay bale. From below, so faint she almost missed it, came a scratching sound, as if someone, or something, had heard her efforts and was responding in kind. Marlene froze, ears straining to catch the sound again. Scratch, scratch, unmistakable, coming from beneath the trap door. "Wren? Ivy?" she called, voice trembling with hope and terror. The scratching stopped. Then, faintly, "Mom?" A sob tore from Marlene's throat. She clawed at the metal ring with desperate fingers, but the trap door wouldn't budge. It was locked or bolted from. "Below, I'm here. I'll get you out," she promised, already fumbling for her phone. No signal, of course. This far corner of the property had always been a dead zone. The wind picked up suddenly, carrying the smell of rain. In the distance, lightning split the sky, followed by a low rumble of thunder. A summer storm was rolling in. "I'm going for help. I'll be right back," she shouted toward the trapdoor, praying her daughters could hear. She ran across the field, feet flying over uneven ground. The farmhouse lights glowed in the distance like a beacon. Halfway there, the heavens opened. Rain poured down in sheets, instantly soaking her to the skin. By the time she reached the house, she was gasping for breath. "Silas! Hayes!" She burst through the door. "I found them, under the hay bales!" The house erupted into action. Hayes radioed for backup, while Silas grabbed tools, crowbars, bolt, cutters, anything that might help open the trapdoor. They piled into Hayes's SUV, the only vehicle that could navigate the sodden fields. The rain fell in blinding torrents now, turning the dirt to mud that sucked at their boots as they rushed. Back to the hay bales. Marlene led the way, desperate to return to the spot before the rising water obscured the trap door. "There!" she pointed, but in the downpour, all the bales looked identical. Silas and Hayes spread out, checking each bale. The one Marlene had moved was already settling back into place from the weight of water. She pushed against it frantically, slipping in the mud. "Here!" she called. "Help me move it!" Together they shoved the waterlogged bale aside, revealing the trap door now covered in a film of muddy water. Silas wedged a crowbar into the seam and heaved. A creaking sound rose above the storm's roar as the door gave way, revealing darkness below. Marlene aimed her flashlight down, illuminating a crude wooden ladder descending into an underground space. "Wren! Ivy!" she shouted. No response came. The scratching had stopped. "I'm going down," Marlene declared, already lowering herself onto the ladder. Hayes grabbed her arm. "Wait. We don't know what's down there." A sudden movement behind them made them whirl around. Miriam Blackwood stood by the hay bales, her thin frame silhouetted by lightning. Rain plastered her white hair to her skull, giving her a spectral appearance. "You shouldn't have moved the bale," she said, her voice oddly calm amidst the storms of fury. "The harvest isn't ready yet." "Where are my daughters?" Marlene lunged toward the old woman, but Hayes held her back. "They're waiting," Miriam replied with an eerie smile. "Just like mine waited." Silas stepped forward, rage contorting his features. "What have you done to our girls?" Miriam ignored him, her gaze fixed on Marlene. "The land has its cycles, its hungers." "I tried to explain, but you wouldn't listen." Lightning illuminated the scene in stark flashes. Miriam by the hay bales, Hayes restraining Marlene, Silas advancing on the old woman, and behind them, unseen, the trapdoor yawning open to darkness below. Hayes handed Marlene to Silas and approached Miriam cautiously. "Ms. Blackwood, we need to know where the children are." Miriam's eyes flicked toward the barn. "They're safe, protected, like the others before them." As Hayes reached for her handcuffs, a tremendous crack split the air. A bolt of lightning struck the old barn, sending splinters of wood flying. Flames erupted despite the downpour, crawling up the timbers with unnatural speed. "No!" Miriam shrieked, suddenly animated. She broke away from Hayes and ran toward the burning structure. "Not yet! It's not time!" The officers pursued her while Marlene turned back to the trap door. She wouldn't be distracted. Her children were close. She could feel it. As she prepared to descend the ladder, an ominous groan came from the barn. The burning roof was collapsing. "Hayes!" Silas shouted. "Marlene!" Marlene looked up to see part of the barn roof crash down, trapping Hayes and Miriam inside the flaming structure. Silas ran toward them without hesitation. A terrible choice confronted her: help the others or continue searching for her daughters. The rain intensified, water now streaming into the open trapdoor, beginning to flood whatever space lay below. "I'm coming back," she promised toward the dark opening, then ran toward the burning barn. Inside, chaos reigned. Smoke billowed through the structured timber beams ablaze, despite the rain pouring through the collapsed section. Hayes and Miriam were pinned behind a fallen support beam, flames advancing toward them. "Get Hayes out!" Marlene shouted to Silas. "I'll find another way around." She circled through the smoke, coughing as ash filled her lungs. Through the haze, she spotted Miriam trapped beneath splintered wood, Hayes trying unsuccessfully to free her. "Leave me," the old woman wheezed. "Save the children." "Where are they?" Marlene demanded, crouching beside her. "Tell me." Miriam's eyes cleared momentarily. "Underground. The land keeps them safe. The water." She broke off, coughing. Water. The flood. The trap door. Marlene's blood ran cold as she realized what was happening. The underground space was flooding. If her daughters were truly below the E. Hey, Bale. She heard it then, above the storm and the fire's roar, a rhythmic tapping coming from beneath the barn floor, like someone trying to get attention, like children trapped as water rose around them. "They're under the barn!" Marlene screamed to Hayes. "The tapping! Listen!" The detective paused her efforts to free Miriam, head tilted. The rhythmic sound continued. Not random, but deliberate. A pattern. 3 quick taps. Pause. 3 more. SOS, Hayes breathed. "Keep them alive," Miriam whispered, blood trickling from her lip. Her eyes held Marlene's with fierce intensity. "The land needs them, like it needed the others." "You're insane!" Marlene spat, turning away from the old woman. Silas had already begun clearing debris from the barn floor, following the sound. "Here!" he shouted, pointing to wooden planks that looked newer than the surrounding flooring. "The bee tapping's coming from here!" Marlene joined him, clawing at the edges of the planks with her bare fingers. The rain pouring through the collapsed roof was creating a small river across the barn floor, water disappearing into the cracks between boards. If there was a space beneath, it was flooding rapidly. "Find something to pry these up," Hayes called, still struggling to free herself from the debris trapping her leg. Silas spotted a rusty crowbar hanging on the wall and lunged for it, narrowly avoiding a falling beam. The heat was intensifying as more of the barn caught fire, despite the downpour. Marlene pressed her lips to the floor. "Wren! Ivy! We're coming! Hold on!" The tapping grew more frantic, accompanied now by muffled voices. Silas wedged the crowbar between the planks and heaved with all his strength. The wood splintered, revealing another trapdoor beneath, larger than the one by the hay bales, with a heavy iron lock securing it. "Stand back," Hayes ordered, having finally freed herself. She drew her service weapon and fired 3 precise shots at the lock. It shattered, the sound lost in the storm's fury. Silas and Marlene wrenched the trapdoor open. Dark water churned below, illuminated by their flashlights. The underground space was already half flooded. And there, huddled on a raised platform of wooden crates, were 2 small figures. "Mom!" they screamed in unison, their faces pale ovals in the darkness. "Wren! Ivy!" Marlene was already lowering herself into the churning water, which reached her waist. The cold shocked her system, but she pushed forward, arms outstretched toward her daughters. Silas followed closely behind while Hayes radioed for emergency services, reporting their location and the children's condition. The twins clung to each other on their makeshift island, soaked and shivering but alive. As Marlene waded closer, she could see how thin they'd become, their clothes hanging loosely on their frames. But their eyes, their beautiful eyes, were alert and aware. "You found us," Ivy sobbed as Marlene reached them. "You really found us." "We knew you would," Wren added, her voice hoarse. "We left clues whenever she let us out to play." Marlene gathered them in her arms, unable to speak through her tears. Behind her, Silas let out a strangled cry, reaching out to touch their faces, as if to confirm they were real. "The water's rising fast," Hayes called from above. "We need to get them out now." The family moved through the deepening water toward the ladder, Marlene and Silas each carrying a twin. The flood swirled around them, murky and cold, already reaching Marlene's chest. As they neared the ladder, Ivy suddenly twisted in Marlene's arms. "The others!" she cried. "We can't leave them!" Marlene followed her daughter's gaze to a dark corner of the underground room, where the water was rapidly submerging what looked like crude beds. "What others, sweetheart?" "The children in the pictures," Wren explained, pointing to the walls now disappearing beneath the rising water. She said they live here, too, that we were joining them. Hayes leaned further through the trap door, shining her flashlight toward the corner. The beam illuminated what at first looked like more child-sized beds, but on closer inspection were small shrines, photographs in floating frames, toys arranged carefully, and something else, something that made Hayes's blood run cold. Small bones, partially buried in the earthen floor, now being uncovered by the current. "Get them out now!" she ordered, her voice sharp with urgency. Silas lifted Wren up to Hayes's waiting arms, then Ivy. Marlene was about to follow when a hand gripped her ankle from beneath the murky water. She screamed, jerking away, but the grip tightened. Miriam's face emerged from the flood, her white hair swirling around her like seaweed. "You don't understand," the old woman rasped, somehow having dragged herself into the chamber. "The farm requires sacrifice, blood for the soil, children for the harvest." Her eyes were wild, her expression no longer human. "My baby's burned. The land demanded replacements. Every generation. It must be fed." Silas grabbed Marlene's arm, pulling her from Miriam's grasp. "She's completely insane." "No!" Miriam shrieked as they climbed the ladder. "They belong to the land now. They belong with the others." Outside the barn, Sheriff Dougherty and his deputies had arrived, along with paramedics. The twins were quickly wrapped in thermal blankets and ushered toward an ambulance. "Wait!" Ivy called to Hayes. "You have to know, she kept us in different places. Sometimes in the shed, sometimes under the hay bale, but mostly down there, under the barn." "She said we were special," Wren added, clutching her sister's hand. "That twins were powerful, that the farm needed us to stay fertile." Hayes knelt before them. "Did she hurt you?" The girls exchanged looks. "Not really," Ivy answered. "She fed us, told us stories about the farm spirits, said if we tried to leave, the spirits would be angry. She made us draw pictures," Wren continued, "of the woman with the long hair. Said that was the farm's guardian, watching over all the children." Marlene held her daughters close as the paramedics examined them. Despite their ordeal, they seemed physically unharmed beyond malnutrition and mild exposure. But their eyes held a haunted knowledge no child should possess. Inside the barn, Hayes and Dougherty carefully approached the trap door. The water had nearly reached the barn floor now, the underground chamber almost completely submerged. Miriam was nowhere to be seen. "She's still down there," Hayes said grimly. "Probably drowned. Look at this." Dougherty directed his flashlight to objects floating to the surface. Toys, photographs, small shoes. Evidence of other children. Evidence of decades of abductions. In the ambulance, Marlene sat between her daughters, their small, hands gripped tightly in hers. Silas rode in front with the driver, repeatedly turning to assure himself his family was really there. "How did you survive so long?" Marlene asked softly. "We had each other," Ivy answered simply. "And we knew you'd find us." "We left you messages," Wren added. "Whenever she'd let us out to exercise, we'd hide things for you to find." The hair clip in the garden, Marlene realized. The notebook under the swing. The twins nodded in unison. "Why? Did she keep moving you?" Silas asked from the front seat. "She said we had to learn all the hiding places," Ivy explained. "That the farm had many secrets, and we needed to know them all." As the ambulance pulled away from the farm, Marlene looked back at the burning barn. Through the rain and smoke, she thought she saw a figure watching them leave. A thin, white-haired woman standing impossibly still amid the chaos. But when she blinked, there was nothing there but falling rain and rising floodwaters, washing away the secrets of the Holloway farm. Behind them, Hayes emerged from the barn, a grim expression on her face. In her gloved hand was a child's journal, its pages miraculously dry. The first entry, dated nearly 50 years ago, began, "The woman with the dark hair came again last night. She says I'm special. She says I belong to the farm now." The sterile hospital lights seemed impossibly bright after a month of darkness. Wren and Ivy sat side by side in matching beds, thin fingers intertwined across the gap between them. Despite doctors' attempts to separate them for individual examinations, they'd become hysterical when apart. A new development, Marlene noted with quiet concern. Monitors beeped steadily, IV bags replenishing the nutrients they'd been denied. Physically, the girls were malnourished but uninjured. The psychological assessment would come later, after they'd rested. Marlene hadn't left their side since the rescue 12 hours earlier. She sat in the uncomfortable visitor's chair, alternating between watching them sleep and staring out the window toward the distant hills where their farm lay. Silas entered, carrying coffee. "Any change?" he asked, handing her a cup. "They're still sleeping," she whispered. "Doctor says it's normal. Their bodies need to recover." He nodded, his weathered face showing every minute of their ordeal. "Hayes is here. Wants to talk to us." Detective Hayes waited in the hallway, dark circles under her eyes the only indication she hadn't slept. The journal they'd recovered from. The barn was sealed in an evidence bag. "We found Miriam's body," she said without preamble, "drowned in the underground room. And we've identified remains of at least 3 other children, including the twins who disappeared in 1985. Marlene pressed a hand to her mouth. "All this time?" "We've been searching her house," Hayes continued, "found journals dating back decades. She suffered a psychotic break after her daughters died in the fire. Convinced herself the farm needed child sacrifices to remain fertile. That the land spirits demanded it. But why take them and return their belongings? Why leave clues?" Silas asked. "It seems part of her wanted to be caught. The journals describe her growing internal conflict. And," Hayes hesitated, "there's evidence she wasn't always alone in this." "What do you mean?" Marlene's voice sharpened. "Some entries reference the others who understand. We're investigating whether she had accomplices over the years." A nurse approached, interrupting with news that the girls were awake and asking for their parents. Hayes nodded for them to go, promising to return later. Inside the room, Wren and Ivy were sitting up, their identical faces brightening as their parents entered. "Can we go home now?" Wren asked immediately. Marlene exchanged glances with Silas. "Not yet, sweetheart. The doctors want to make sure you're both healthy first." "Not to the farm," Ivy clarified quietly. "We don't want to go back there ever again." "No, of course not," Silas assured them. "We're going to find a new home." Over the following hours, the twins shared fragments of their month in captivity. How Miriam had discovered them during their game of hide-and-seek, lured them to the storage shed with promises of secret treasures. How she'd drugged them with sweet lemonade, then moved them between hiding places around the property. She told us about the farm spirits, Ivy explained, her voice clinical and detached in a way that broke Marlene's heart. Said they chose special children to keep the land alive. She had pictures of other kids, Wren added. Said they were our farm family now. That we'd never leave. "How did you survive?" Marlene asked gently. The twins exchanged that silent look that had always marked their deepest communications. "We pretended," Ivy answered. "Pretended to believe her stories. Drew the pictures she wanted. And we made a plan," Wren continued. "Left the clues when she'd let us out to exercise at night. We knew you'd find us," they said in unison, their puai-puits, faith humbling, and heartbreaking. That evening, Hayes returned with more discoveries. Miriam's journals revealed a lifetime of delusion, carefully hidden beneath a veneer of normalcy. The fire that killed her daughters hadn't been accidental. She'd set it herself, believing she was offering them to the land spirits. When they died, her guilt manifested as a belief that the sacrifice had been rejected, that she needed to provide different children. The most disturbing part, Hayes said quietly, ensuring the twins couldn't overhear, is that she apparently believed she was protecting these children, not harming them. She left food, books, toys. In her mind, she was creating a sanctuary. "A sanctuary that nearly became their tomb," Marlene whispered. 2 days later, doctors declared the twins physically stable enough for discharge. Psychological recovery would take longer, but they could begin that process away from the hospital. The Holloways checked into a hotel while Silas arranged to sell the farm. None of them would ever return there again. That night, with the twins, finally sleeping peacefully in the adjoining room, Marlene stood at the window watching distant lightning illuminate the hills. "I keep thinking about what Miriam said," she confessed to Silas, "about the darkness." She was insane, Marlene. Nothing she said meant anything. "I know. But there was something." She trailed off, unable to articulate the strange certainty that had led her to the hay bale, to the barn floor, the dreams that had guided her to their daughters. Across town, Hayes sat in her office reviewing evidence photos. The underground room, now drained and fully documented, the strange drawings covering the walls, and something the forensic team had discovered beneath layers of dirt, symbols carved into the foundation stones, weathered by time. Symbols that predated Miriam, predated even the farm itself. Meanwhile, in their hotel room, the twins lay awake, despite their parents' belief. They were sleeping, their hands clasped tightly across the gap between their beds. "Do you think she was right?" Ivy whispered. "About the woman with the dark hair?" Wren's eyes gleamed in the darkness. "I saw her too. When you were sleeping, she watched over us." Outside their window, the wind shifted direction, carrying the distant scent of freshly cut hay from farms spread across the valley. In the field where the Holloway farm stood empty, the remaining hay bales cast long shadows in the moonlight, their pattern visible only from above. The unmistakable outline of a woman with outstretched arms, waiting to embrace whoever might next call the land home. That was the end of this story. Thank you so much for listening. Where are you tuning in from today? I'd love to know in the comments. If you enjoyed this tale, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more intriguing stories, just like this one. Don't forget to share with friends and family who might appreciate it too, spreading both kindness and awareness with every share. Until next time, sweet dreams, and remember, always check under the hay bales.